In this video, we'll be creating a modern, responsive and dark theme login UI from scratch using Flutter. Let's start. After creating your Flutter project using the flutter create command, make sure to come to this URL, the link to it will be given in the description below, and install all of the files present in both of these directories. After you've downloaded them, create a new folder here called assets, and here just drag and drop the folders we just saw. This will give us access to this image and the two SVGs for Facebook and Google logo. We can go to the pubspec.yaml file and register these files. So I'll just uncomment this. Then we'll have the path given here, which is assets, images, and then the signin underscore balls dot png and assets slash SVGs. And here I've put a slash after SVGs, which will mean that it will register all the files that are mentioned in the folder. After that is completed, you can go to the main.dart file, remove all the boilerplate code, remove some of the comments, and create a first screen, which is the login screen. Here we are going to import a material dart. For now, it's going to be a stateless widget. So let's just name the login screen, and this will return a scaffold. And now I'll just take this login screen, put it as the home property in the material app. After this is done, we can make sure to run this on the Chrome, and let's see if this works. While this is happening, you can go to this link, will be mentioned in the description, and go to the palette.dart file and copy all of this. Here in the lib folder, we'll again create palette.dart and paste all of this. These are all the colors that will be required in our login UI. And a web app has now launched. So if we just go there, we see a blank scaffold. Now what I want to do is just change the background color of this. Since this is what we are trying to achieve, we need a black background, and this is exactly the color for it. So we can go to the main.dart file, redefine our theme. So our theme will now be theme data.dark.copywidth. So it's going to have all the properties of dark theme, plus it will override whatever we wanted. So I want the scaffold background color to be overridden with the palette dot background color. Since all of the properties here are static, I don't have to create an object for this. Now if we come back, it has changed to somewhat blackish. Now let's go to the login screen, and here in the body, we are going to have a single child scroll view. We are having a single child scroll view because its child is going to be a column. And this column is going to have many fields, and since we want it to be responsive, we want all the fields to always be shown, and that's not necessarily possible on smaller screens. If you come to this UI, you can see if I just shrink this down and suppose view it on a tablet, some of the fields will be scrollable. I want that scroll effect to be there, so that's why we are using a single child scroll view. Another thing is that when I click on these text fields, a keyboard will appear, and this keyboard has the chances of creating a render flow error. And that's why we are using single child scroll view, so that when the keyboard appears, the error goes away and we can still scroll through all the elements visible on the screen. If it's not understandable to you right now, we'll see it in action in just some time. The first thing in my column is going to be image.asset. And what is that image.asset? Well, assets slash images slash, let's see the name here. It is signin balls png. So I'm going to have signin underscore balls dot png, and let's see what I get. Here it looks good. The only problem with this is it's to the left. I want it in the center. So I can just wrap this column widget with a centered widget. And now it is right in the center. Next thing is a sign in text, just like this one. So I'm just going to have constant text, call it sign in, and then pass in a style. The style is going to be a text style, and this text is going to have a bolded property, so font weight dot bold. And if we just do this, it is quite small. I want the size to be bigger, so I can just increase its size by having font size as 50. And now it's much bigger and looks better. The next thing we want is a little bit of space here, and after that, two identical buttons. So we leave some space and create a separate widget for this button so that we can create it 2 times very easily. So here in our after our text, we are going to have constant sized box, and this is going to have a height of 50. After that is done, I'm going to go to the lib folder, create a new folder called widgets, and in this widget, I'm going to create our very first widget. I'll call this social button.dart. So we'll import a material package. Then we are going to create a stateless widget and call this social button. And here we are going to return a text button. And if you see why we want to return a text button, well, because it is a text button, it's not elevated, so we don't need that. But just using text button is not enough, because we also have an icon with us. Definitely we can use text button with a child as row, but why to do so much when Flutter has an inbuilt thing to avoid that, which is text button.icon. If we do that, we need to pass in 3 required arguments, which is onPressed. For now, it can be an empty function, icon, and our icon is this SVG right here, which is the Google logo or F logo. We'll look into that in a bit. And the third thing is the label. So what do we want to type here, or what do we want to show here? This is the continue with Google text. So let's start with the icon part. For the icon, I want to show either Facebook logo or Google logo, but they are in the SVG format and Flutter doesn't have any support for SVG directly built in the SDK. So what we can do is add a dependency called flutter_svg. After we add that, we do need to restart this. And in the icon here, you just need to type svg picture.asset and make sure to import flutter svg, not just svg, flutter svg.dart. And in the asset, you can pass F logo or Google logo, but we don't know which button it is. So we are going to take it from the constructor. So we are going to have final string icon path, and we'll require this through the constructor. So we'll have required this dot icon path. I can take this and put it here. If you didn't understand why we did this, you'll understand when we create 2 of these buttons in the login screen. But for now, just bear with me. Another thing is the label, and the label is also going to differ. So we'll have to take that from the constructor as well. So we'll have final string label, and we'll require this through the constructor. And in the label, we need to pass in a widget. So we'll have text, and then we'll pass in the label. Now let's see how this is looking. Let's run our application, and in the meantime, we can just go to the login screen and use this social button. So we'll have social button. So our first social button is the Google button. We are just reusing the button that we created here. It is just cleaner code. Of course, you can write this code that we returned here in this part and just do it 2 times. But why to do that if you can just create one simple class for it and then you reuse it anywhere in your application? It has many benefits. Like if you want to change the theme of your social button, you can just go to one file or one class and change it. Anyways, coming back to this, the icon path for the Google logo is assets/svgs/glogo.svg, and the label is continue with Google. Also, we'll have to put a constant here, and after we put that, you can see this is how our app is looking. Very terrible. What has happened here? So basically, Google logo SVG is quite big. It has taken the entire space. It would have given a render flow error, but since we have a single child scroll view, we are able to scroll through this and see the entire thing. So this is the entire logo, which is quite big. We just need to reduce the size of the logo. So we can just go here, add a width, and the width can be, let's say 25. Here you can see it's quite small, pretty good. And we can change the color as well. We want the color to be white. So we'll have color from palette.white color. If you're wondering why even white color is being saved in palette, that's because I just want uniformity. I just want all my colors to save in just one file. So if I want to change theming of my application, I can do all of that from one single file. Now our logo has turned white. That's pretty good. Now I also want to change the color of this text and perhaps just increase its font size. So I can go to the label, have style, and the style is going to be constant text style. The color will be palette, dot white color. Currently it's blue, I just want it to be white. And the font size can be 17. And here you can see both of these elements have turned white. So what is the next thing that we need? Well, I want some padding to be there. I want a border to be there. And if you just hover over this, you will see that the size of this button is quite small. I just want to increase its size. All of this can be done through a property called style. And this style is going to be text button.style from. You can definitely use button style here, but that's going to have a lot more boilerplate code to write, and I prefer just using the default text button properties because that's how I want to design my app. So here I want the padding to be there, so the padding is going to be edge insets dot symmetric. From the vertical direction I want 30, and from the horizontal direction I want 100. I'll just put a constant here, and if I come over here, if I hover over this, you can see it's much bigger already. Now just to display this as a button, I want borders to be there. So to put borders, I can come here, have shape. And with this shape property, you can have rounded rectangle border and pass in the side. The side is going to be constant border side with a color, and the color is palette dot border color. It's already mentioned. If I just save this much, let's put some formatting by just putting commas and saving. You can see the border is now seen, but it's not as thick as something like here. So how can I fix that? Well, I can just pass width 3 over here, and it's much thicker. I still want the border radius to be there. That means I want the curve to be present here. So to put that curve, I can just have border radius as border radius dot circular, pass in circular as 10. Remove constant from here, put it to the border side because this is not a constant. It doesn't have a constant constructor. And after that, if you come here, it looks just like this one. Pretty good. Now we want similar thing to happen for continue with Facebook. So I can just go to the login screen. All I have to do here is put in another social button. I'll pass in flogo.svg and continue with Facebook and save it. But they are merging with each other. To fix that, obviously we can just put a size box. So I'll just put a size box of height 20 and they're much farther away. But now you can see the issue. These buttons are not aligned with each other. The reason for that is quite simple. The continue with Facebook has more characters in this letter. And since in the social button, we are using padding so that we can determine the width of this button, we are getting this error. So we have put horizontal as 100 and this padding is from the child itself. So here, from here, we have padding of 100, and if the text is bigger, we have padding of 100 bigger, right? How can we fix that? Well, one fix is not to depend on padding at all and just using a fixed width by specifying the size over here, the fixed size that's present on the text button, but that might not be very useful when we have some bigger words here. So if there's a larger piece of text here, it might just give us error or it will just look bad. So what I have in mind is just to take this horizontal width from the login screen itself. So what I mean by that is just have final double horizontal padding, and here we are going to have this dot horizontal padding equal to 100. So if the user doesn't enter anything, it will give us horizontal padding of 100. But if the user does want to override the existing 100, they can do that from the login screen as well. So here we can have horizontal padding, remove the constant and save it. Coming to the login screen to fix the issue, for Facebook, I can just pass in the horizontal padding as suppose 90 because I want it to be lesser. And now if I come here, you can see it's 90 and both are aligned to each other. That's pretty good. After having the buttons designed, we want an OR to be there. So let's put a very simple OR by having a simple size box. So we have size box of height 15 and then a text of OR. And then obviously we'll just style it so that we can make it much bigger. So the font size here is going to be 17 remove the constant, and we just have or present. Great. Now again we'll leave the size box as 15 so that we leave space, and then we can work on these text fields. So to create a text field, again we are going to create a widget because there are two text fields, the email and password. So here I can create a new file called loginfield.dart, import material dart, then create a stateless widget called loginfield, and here we are going to return a text form field. And in the decoration we can pass in input decoration because we want to design the text field. And just to see something in action, let's have login field passed to the login screen. Let's import it and const sign over here this text field, and it's taking all the available width on the screen. That's how text fields work. They take all the width on the screen. It doesn't matter if there's a widget or anything, they'll take everything that's possible. So we want to reduce its width first of all. So we can wrap this text form field with either a container or a constraint box. I'm going to go ahead with constraint box, and I'll pass in constraints with box constraints as a value, where the max width is going to be 400. And if we come back over here, it's aligned with these two. That's pretty good. Now I want to design this. How do I want to design this? Let's start off by adding borders everywhere like this. So we'll have enabled border, and this will be outline input border. Enabled border basically means to show the border when the user is not clicking on the text field. For example, right now you can see the borders are activated and the user is not clicking on them. But when I click on it, the border disappears. I don't want that to happen. I want the borders to stay there. So for that, we are also going to have focused border. So we'll have focused border with outline input border. As the name suggests, outline input border just gives outline border. And both of these are going to have the same thing, because whenever we click over here, we don't want to change anything. Maybe we want to change the color, so we'll do that. Outline input border, we are going to have a border side, and the border side is going to be border side. It's going to be const. We'll pass in the color, and the color is going to be palette dot border color, and we'll have to pass in the width as 3. Just similar to what we did in the social button right here. It's the exact same thing. And to match it even more, we are going to copy this border radius and put it right here. So border radius is not a part of this border side. It's a part of the outline input border. And now if we come over here, this looks good. There are a few fixes to this because we don't have the hint text yet and anything. But before moving there, if I just click over here, you can see the border has changed. I don't want this to happen. So I'll just copy this, paste it as a value for the focus border, and save it. Now if I click over here, nothing changes. That's nice. But what should happen when we click over here is this border changes to something of pink, like this gradient, the middle gradient. So what I can do is, in the focus border, I'll have the color set to palette dot gradient 2 and save it. Now if I click over here, you can see this has a nice pink color and it looks nice. Now obviously this doesn't match this, so there are a few fixes. We want to increase the padding and have a hint text so that we can say it's an email or a password. So in the decoration, we are also going to add content padding. Then we are going to have constant edge insets dot all and pass in 27. This is a tried and tested value. So if you have anything else, please use it. This is what I prefer. And obviously we want a hint text, and this hint text is going to vary for every time we initialize this login field. So I want this to be present or passed in as a constructor value. So I'm just going to have final string hint text. I'll require this, and now I'll go down. In the input decoration itself, I'm going to pass in the hint text, and the hint text is going to be hint text that's coming from the constructor. Now I'll go to the login screen. The login field now requires some values. What are those values? Well, hint text. And the hint text is email. Now I'll just have constant here. And here you can see it's asking for email. Now I'll just paste it again and say password. And you can see we have both of these ready. So let's leave a sized box of 15. Now there's much spacing. And again, we leave a sized box but not 15, 20 this time, because now we want the submit button like sign in. So we want the gradient button like this to appear here. So for that, we are going to create our last widget called gradient button.dart. Why are we creating this in a separate widget? Because it's not having one or two instances. That's just because I don't want to make this widget more messy. If this gradient button wants to be used anywhere else in our application, it can be used. If not, I just don't want to make login screen look very untidy. So I'll just have material.dart imported. We are going to have stateless widget and call this gradient button. For the gradient button, it's not going to be text button because I want some elevation kind of to show up. So there's going to be elevated button. There's going to be on pressed. And just to note, the on pressed here, you will require it outside in the login screen because this gradient button can be used anywhere. And the same goes for the login field. If you have some controller or some on submitted, you'll have to take it from the constructor here. Also for this button, you have this on pressed, you'll have to take it from a constructor. If you want to take this, you'll just have final void callback on pressed, and you can require this through the constructor. So you have on pressed. Now you can just pass in on pressed like this. Go to the login screen and here just have on pressed as an empty function as of now. But I'm not doing all of this right now. I hope it's clear to you. If it's not, let me know in the comment section and I'll help you out. Anyways, coming back to the gradient button, we have the elevated button and now we want the child. And the child should be a very simple text called sign in. And we'll pass in some style. So let's have style text style. This will have a font weight of fontweight.w600 and font size of 70. Let's take this gradient button, put it in the login screen and see how it's looking right now. So here you can see this is our nice gradient button, but there's no gradient. So let's try to put in some gradient, but before that, let's increase its size because right now it's looking too small. We want it this way. We want it as the same size as other fields. So we'll go to the gradient button and in the elevated button, we have a property called style, which will be elevated button dot style from. Again, you can use button style here instead of using elevated button, but I'm just avoiding a lot of boilerplate code. And here I'm going to pass in fixed size, and the fixed size is going to be constant size, and the width is going to be 395, height 55. This is a tried and tested value. I just checked it every single time and saw if it's matching. Since it's matching now, I don't need to care about it. Now to avoid this warning, the child should always go down, so it's now down. Now comes the main part. How do I add gradient to this non-gradient button? Well, that's the catch. Elevated button doesn't have any property called gradient or anything like that. What we need to do in order to get gradient is wrap this elevated button with a widget known as container. This container can have a gradient property which is present in the decoration. So if we pass in box decoration, here it has a property of gradient. And here we can pass in the gradient that we want. So we have constant linear gradient and we'll pass in all the colors. So what are our colors? Well, we have already passed that in the palette. So we have palette.gradient1, palette.gradient2 and palette.gradient3. But if we come back over here, you can see it's not visible. If you zoom in at the corners, you'll still find some color other than blue showing up, but it's not showing up in the entire button. To make that happen, what we need to do is go to the style of this elevated button and pass in background color as colors.transparent. Of course, if you want, you can push that in the palette.dart, but I don't care about it. And shadow color as colors.transparent. If we come back now, you can see sign in button is now looking gradient. You might wonder why this works. The logic is pretty simple. We just made this transparent. If we make this transparent and hide all of these colors, you can see the button is not even showing up anymore. It is there. You can see the pointer icon there. It's there, but it's not showing up for us. Because the background color and shadow color are transparent, they match the background color or the first parent that they can find. And the first parent they can find is the scaffold. And the scaffold has a color of this, so they've taken that color. So I'll just have this, and this looks nice, but you can see there's a little of curve over here, so I want that curve. I can have border radius as border radius dot circular and pass in 7. And now if you see, the curve is now back. But still this doesn't match what's present over here. If you want this, you can keep it this. But if you wanted something like this, there are some properties present in the linear gradient called begin, and begin has access to alignment dot bottom left. So this gradient, this first color will begin from the bottom left and will end as alignment dot top right. So it will begin over here and end over here, and that's why now both of the colors are matching. So we have completed the entire design now. If you want to check if it's responsive or not, you can just shrink the size and see that it's completely responsive. If you just minimize its width as well, we don't get any render flow errors because it's now scrollable. And if you just expand this, it still looks great. So this was it for this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.